Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, here we go. What I have for you right now is episode 2 of When the Hunt Calls. For this episode, I was honored to have none other than contributing writer for Meateater, Patrick Durkin. Patrick Durkin is probably most recently well known for the article he dropped back in May, Is Hunting Too White? Now, I don't know about anybody else, but definitely this article created a lot of dialogue amongst a lot of hunters that I know. So I can only assume that was the same throughout the hunting community. So without further ado, here is episode number 2 of When the Hunt Calls. Hope you guys enjoy it.
Hey,
Hey, you see me?
yes, sir. I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect, perfect. Awesome. How are you doing this evening?
Very good.
All right. I just made it on time myself from work. So, uh,
A long day, huh?
yes, sir. A little over a 12-hour day at work with, like I mentioned earlier, with the July 4th holiday last week, all of us being off, that kind of backs us up in regards to deliveries and things like that. And, a lot of July 4th sales, a lot of people ordering stuff, so it puts a lot more on our trucks to go out and deliver.
Yep.
So, yep, yep, yep.
Uh,
So,
Good for you.
thank you, thank you. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. I work long hours too, but I'm always stuck down here in my basement office I have in Wisconsin.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
How do you like that? Are you working from home?
yeah. I've been working from home since about actually 2001, and
Wow.
so going on 19 years this year. And the biggest part, the biggest change for me was basically you're by yourself all day. There's no water cooler, and and that took a little getting used to. But then once I got used to it, I really kind of came to like it a lot because I realized there's no more of this time being wasted in meetings and that kind of stuff where you get getting stuck in meetings where nothing's really being accomplished. Here,
Ah,
as a freelancer, I've learned that as long as you're working hard, you'll be okay.
I yeah, yeah, you're not missing anything in terms of I totally agree in terms of the non-productive work meetings.
Yeah,
But you know what? We seem to have rolled right into this, but let me do a quick introduction.
you bet.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of When the Hunt Calls. For those of you who don't know, my name is Cliff Cadet, also known as at Urban Archery NYC on Instagram. And if this is the first time you are tuning into this Instagram live feed, basically what When the Hunt Calls is basically an opportunity for me to share my journey with you guys by interviewing various people where while I'm taking the time to ask questions and pick, various people's brains, you guys can learn right alongside with me. Today's guest, the handsome gentleman that you see right below me, is none other than author Patrick Durkin. You guys, if you're like me, I wasn't familiar with Patrick Durkin or even Meateater per se up until the article that came out on May 17th last month, Is Hunting Too White? I wanted to bring Patrick on to basically discuss the article because I felt it really hit home for me. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Durkin. All
Well,
right,
thanks for having me.
thank you for coming on. I know you are a busy person, and I really appreciate you doing this. I know you've probably been talking about this article for a while now,
Hmm.
but before we get into the article, what I wanted to do is touch on what you do, or what you've worked on prior to this, because in all honesty, up until maybe 2.5 or 3 months ago, I'm really being generous. I honestly didn't know who Steve Ranella was.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then maybe 2 months ago, I had no idea who people like John Dudley and Cameron Haynes were.
Hmm.
And then up until last month, while I had seen on Netflix, I had seen the Meateater, episode, stuff like that. I had no clue what it was about. And
Yeah.
then, maybe about May 18th, May 19th, a buddy of mine on Instagram tagged me in the Meateater post highlighting this article, is hunting too white? What I want to do is real quick touch on, what have you done, or what other publications do you work with, either, I guess outside of Meateater, which is what primarily
Hmm.
people might know you for.
Yeah. I've been an outdoor writer going back into the 1980s. I started off
Oh,
at the Ashcroft Northwestern newspaper.
okay.
In 1982, I started working there. And then from there, I worked there about 8 or 9 years I did everything from the sports desk to the city
Wow.
desk to the news desk, newswire at night. And then I covered school board meetings, all that kind of stuff. So my background is basically just all around journalism in a
Okay.
newspaper. And then I
All
went
right.
from there to a magazine called Deer and Deer Hunting Magazine. It's still in publication. It's been around since 1977. It was really one of the first real
Wow.
niche magazines that we had in hunting. If it's kind of been, for me, it's been an interesting career because I've seen my career change, and as the time goes along, a lot of things that we thought were going to be around our entire lives as journalists have really, as you know, kind of faded away. The newspapers are fading away. Print magazines are they've gone down not in quality so much as just people aren't reading them. They're going online, doing the kind of stuff you and I are doing right now. And
Mm.
but along the way, I did a Deer and Deering magazine for about 11 years, and then in 2001 I started freelancing. And in the last 18, 19 years, I've been doing a lot of work with the Archery Trade Association. It's the trade organization for the archery industry. So
Okay.
if you ever heard of the ATA show, I work at
Yes.
that. I work at that every year. Been
All
doing
right.
that. I've been doing that for a long time, and I also write a lot for American Hunter magazine, NRA's hunting magazine, and I
Okay.
also help. Meateater. I started working with those guys about 15, 14 months ago now. I've known Steve
Okay.
Ranella since we first met probably in January of 2010 on a deer hunt here in Wisconsin that a mutual friend of ours invited us down for. Doug Duran's been one of Steve's longtime friends and my friend too. So that's where I met Steve years ago. And I always, it's interesting. I really find it interesting that you mentioned how you didn't know of Steve until just recently.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a good reminder that Steve, I think, is the biggest game changer I've seen in my career when it comes to making hunting so relatable to people. I mean, people really relate to him. They like his message. He makes
Mm.
hunting cool. My kids, you can tell by looking, I'm not a young man. I'm 63 years old,
Oh,
and so
wow.
my kids, I have three daughters who are all between the ages of 30 and 34 right now.
Okay.
And basically, their generation, they love Steve, and they know who he is. When they hear I'm working with Steve, it's like a real notch in my belt. They think, Dad's okay. He's cool if he's working with Steve Ranella. So, but I don't take that lightly, because I really respect the guy and I respect the
Hmm.
people he works with. So, to me, I just think he's one of those guys that comes along maybe once in a generation, and real smart, well spoken, and he does a good job of reaching out to people.
I agree. I agree. I should actually clarify that honestly, I didn't put two and two together. I honestly read about Steve Ranella many, many years ago.
Hmm.
Maybe you've heard of it. I can't remember. I believe it was the New York Post. He was in an article in the New York Post because apparently there had been some kind of big to do about he had moved to Brooklyn,
Okay.
Brooklyn, New York, and then he was I guess someone caught on to the fact that he was trapping squirrels out here.
Okay.
So it was a kind of funny article. So back then when I had seen that article, To me, and I apologize if I offend anyone that's watching or listening, but I was just like, all right, that's just some crazy white guy out in Brooklyn, trapping squirrels. Because you know what I'm saying? That
I hear you.
it was weird to me. But then now, fast forward to now this year, I'm taking up archery. I'm aspiring to bow hunt later this year. I'm now learning about all these different figures within the hunting community. I was like, oh, now it makes sense.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all right.
Yeah. Well, that's how we make connections, though.
Mhm.
I know when I first heard Steve on the radio, he was on Gene Faraka's show on National Public Radio. And my wife had told me that I should listen to this. She heard some previews and sound like the kind of guy that she knew I'd be interested in. And of course,
Okay.
I tell you, I've been around long enough to where I've heard enough people on radio and TV talking for hunting who have not done a very good job. So I was kind of skeptical. But then I listened to Steve for a few minutes, and I thought this guy knows his stuff. I was impressed. And then the
Mhm.
more he talked, the more I listened, and then I'm like you though about it. Some time went by after that, and I kind of forgotten about him. And then all of a sudden, I saw his name pop up in some. I think it was on that Wild Within TV show he was on, and I realized that's the guy that I heard on public radio that day that so
There you
impressed
go.
me,
All right.
And then I started reading his books and realized that he's like I say, I think once in a generation, one of those kind of guys.
Nice, nice. So now let's jump, if you don't mind, right to the article.
Okay.
As I mentioned before with you on the phone, for me, all right, first and foremost, I guess I want to touch on the title. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
the,
Go ahead.
the, all right, because once I saw the title, I was like, oh wow, somebody's starting to stir something up. All right, because um, the title is Hunting Too White. Anytime you say you use too, TOO, in a phrase, you're kind of invoking a sense of, all right, there's too much of something. That means a limitation is about to follow. All right,
Hmm.
so it might put people on edge, but then now you're touching on race, which is a huge issue for just about anybody, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, it doesn't matter. Have you caught, a lot of flack over the last couple of months just on the title alone?
Sure. Yeah. The title alone, I know, was provocative, and at the same time, though, it's one of those. It's for me, it kind of hits. It kind of for me crystallized the whole discussion, because where I came from on this, Cliff, was I've been attending our different hunting trade shows for a good 25, 29 years now straight. I've been going to them every year,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing anyone besides white people, and typically white guys, at these shows, it always hit me that I remember one time, for instance, the show was down in Dallas, and when I walked out of the
Mm-hmm.
show one evening, a guy was selling tickets to I think a Dallas Mavericks basketball game,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked me if I was interested in going to the game, and he's a ticket hawker basically, and I
Mm-hmm.
said no, not really, and he says, hey, I got a question for you. He says, I've been out here the last 2 nights as you folks come out of your this big convention center. He says, seems like it's awfully white, and he was a black man, and I conceded that, yeah, I mean, you look around, how could you deny the fact that most of us walking out of that show were white guys? And then as time went on, I guess what always struck me was no matter how many years I went to the show and how many years I've been hunting here in Wisconsin, how rare it was for me to see a black man out in the woods, or a black woman. I'd see occasionally people fishing who were black, but seldom you see them out hunting. And and I guess where I came up with the title of is, and actually, I should say too, Cliff, usually when you talk to a writer, whether it's magazines or newspapers, whatever it might be, nowadays it's more common, but my era, it was rare for a writer to ever write their own headline. You just wrote your article
Right.
and put your byline on it, and then because of the way pages were designed, you didn't know if it'd be a banner headline or it'd be a one-column headline, two-column
Okay.
headline. So it made no sense to write your own headline. The copy editors, people who processed your copy, would
Mm-hmm.
write the headlines for you. So this actually was my headline, so I have to own it. But I guess where I came up with it was that for me, it got to the crux of the issue is hunting too white? And the reason I was asking that question is that when you look at hunting numbers in our country and where they're going, they've been slowly dropping for most of my working career. And you look at the demographics, and as I point out in the article, about 91%, 92% of hunters in this country are white men, and typically these days those white guys are getting older. They're like me. They've been hunting all their life, but the baby boomers, which I'm a part of that generation, we're getting older. We're dropping by the wayside, and we're not replacing ourselves in the hunting ranks. And so it's like I use the analogy of the monoculture. If you look at a forest or a woodlot with deer don't thrive. Very few animals survive and thrive in a monoculture where it's all of one thing. If you have a whole city planting of trees, all maple trees or all elm trees, whatever it might be, these monocultures, you try to rely everything on that one species of trees, and all it takes is one bad disease to come along, and those trees start dying on you. And I think, well, we have really built a hunting culture in our country that's really based on one group of people, basically people from rural areas, white guys like me. And I live in a small rural community of about 5,000, 6,000 people. So I'm really, what you're looking at right now is your typical American hunter. But I realize that our country is diverse. And if you want hunting to continue, and I like to think that hunting is something that's much bigger than I am, I want to continue. I want it to go on for a long time. I want it to be cool enough where young people see the value in it, the utility in it. And that's where I always say I sound like a Steve Ranella cheerleader. But I think with good reason. I look at this as I think this is a big challenge. We need good leaders in these positions where we look up to them and love what they're doing, respect what they're doing. When I see what you're doing, I think this is what we need. We need young people getting involved in this stuff and making us proud to be hunters and making it not just a white person's activity, but it's everyone's activity, because it's a practical, useful thing that we should all be part of.
No, I totally agree. That's the thing for me. Honestly, as a child, I grew up, archery was a childhood fantasy for me. I grew up a huge fan of the black and white film, The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And then growing up in the 90s, you had Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. And then I was just, it was a big part of my life as a kid because, I used to run around playing. I used to wrap a rubber band around a clothes hanger and pretend it was a bow. So that's how far my fantasy went. And up until about almost 2 years ago, I purchased my first bow. I didn't shoot it much, but I've been shooting consistently since about December of last year. And then earlier this year, I really, looking at social media, the idea of hunting really kind of called out to me. And as I looked throughout social media, I didn't see very many people like myself. So I believed it was one of two things. Either black people didn't hunt, or it was just something that wasn't shared on social media very much, which it is shared on social media a lot. You just don't see many people of color sharing it. Now I know there are black hunters out there, there are Asian hunters out there, there are Hispanic hunters out there, but they are more what they all tend to have in common is a lot of them are more coming from rural areas, not necessarily big cities. Not to say that there aren't hunters in big cities, but I felt like I wanted to kind of share my journey and kind of reach out to other hunters in urban areas. So, for example, my first guest last week happened to be an archery instructor and a hunter of about 2.5, 3 years, who's from New York City, Brooklyn to be exact. And I had him on as a guest, and I wanted to talk about, his experience as a hunter, especially coming from New York City, and whether or not some of the challenges he's facing are kind of like mine. But back to your article, what I had really liked was you know, the numbers you use to back, your the title per se. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? The
Yeah,
statistics
yeah.
that you dealt with, and I was just like, wow. And if you don't mind me touching on
Go
it,
ahead. Go ahead.
one of the things you had referenced was a 2016 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service participation study, in which I believe it was stating that in 2016 that 11.5 million Americans hunted, right?
Hmm.
And then it said that out of that 11.5 mil, 96% of them were white, 3% of them were Hispanic, and then only 1% were black or Asian. Now that's like, that was like, wow. All right, so it wasn't just me. Do you have because I don't think I had jotted any notes down on it, but do you have any ideas like how many of those, let's say 1% of black or Asian, or even the 3% Hispanic, came from urban areas?
God, I don't have that off the tip of my fingers right now,
Hmm.
Cliff. I do know that again. I mean, look at where hunters come from is typically from the rural areas. Because
Hmm.
one thing there that it makes really perfect sense is it's more convenient. The
Hmm.
simple logistics. I mean, I remember getting job advice back in the 1980s, where I had a job offer down in Atlanta, and one guy who's now long since gone, one thing he said to me that I never forgot was, that's a good job. He said, I can tell you if you take a job in a big city, though, you'll spend most of your Friday trying to get out of town to go somewhere to go hunting. Then you spend all of Sunday afternoon trying to get back in the city. He said, right now you can just hop in your car and be gone 5-10 miles and you have a place to hunt. And I think the convenience of it is always a big factor. But
Hmm.
yeah, I wish I had that number rough. I could probably find it, Cliff.
Hmm.
But just looking at some of those numbers, you're citing, one of the things that really jumped at me was how over the course of about the last century we switched from where I think it said we're 80% of the black people living in our country. 80 years ago, 80% of them were like in all rural areas. That's where 80% of black people live, is rural areas, and predominantly in the South. And then the current numbers, though, is that 80% of the black community today lives in urban areas, not
Yes.
not not suburban areas, but urban areas,
Yes.
downtowns. And so you think, if that isn't a challenge and a half to go hunting when you're living in a downtown major city in our country,
Hmm.
that's huge. And
No,
yet,
I agree.
the thing that I find fascinating, there's so many ththings that weave in and out of this article and out of this issue that you can't possibly pack into one article. And because one of the fun things about being a reporter is that you read and you read and you read and you write and you call, you talk to people, you get these folks on the phone, you really know this stuff.
Hmm.
And after a while, you've done about 2 days worth of reading and talking and going over your notes. Then it comes time to actually write it all down and write down what's the most important stuff here. And you realize there's some cool stuff out there they've done on research when it comes to people's interests. And it was fascinating to see how they can start getting some of the sociological stuff and breaking us down. They start looking at us as groups of
Hmm.
people, and you really see that. I think in the one study they're showing that the black community has that tendency, much like the white community, to tend to look at animals more for utilitarian purposes, not for some kind of Hollywood Disney type attitude. They're much
Hmm.
more realistic, and yet they aren't hunting. So you think,
Hmm.
well, if they have an attitude toward animals like we do, and more you respect them, you love them, but you also realize that, well, we too are a predator. We're part of that food chain. We eat
Hmm.
animals, and we don't apologize for it. But some of these attitudes that go through the communities, you realize the black community and the white community have some real similarities there in how they approach it. Yet it's the whites doing most of the hunting. So why is
Hmm.
that? You think that's where I think we have some really interesting discussions facing us,
Hmm.
is why is this so easily accessed for white people and not black people?
Well,
And
I mean, not
and
to cut you off,
yeah,
I apologize for that, but
well,
I
I
like
talk
that
too
you
much.
No, trust me. Anyone watching right now is really here to see you, not me. Um, but I'm glad you had touched on the logistics of it because me personally, living in New York City, New York City is comprised of five boroughs. All right, if anyone watching doesn't know, um, even if I lived in any of the suburbs of the five boroughs, it would still take me at least an hour, even without traffic, to get to the nearest piece of public land.
Yeah.
So logistically speaking, it's hard to work that out. Not to mention now, if any other potential hunters are like myself, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm working 50 hours a week.
Hmm.
So while a lot of the people, for example, I follow on Instagram because that's the social media platform that I deal with a lot. A lot of people are just like, oh, you need to get out there, you need to get out there, you need to just take a day and get out to the woods. And I'm like, that's easier said than done.
You're not
So
kidding.
so yeah, exactly. So the logistics, that's part of it. But one of the awesome things that your article touched on is honestly a black person's view of just hunting with people that don't look like them, with
Hmm.
white men or white women. And I had the opportunity, since beginning my own journey, I had the opportunity to kind of conduct impromptu interviews with people that I didn't know were hunters, that I've worked around over the last 3-4 years. And they are black, they are Hispanic. As a matter of fact, there's a hospital I delivered to, and I came across three guys. One's black, one's Italian, and the other is Puerto Rican. And I told them, I was like, if I ever told a story about you guys, it sounded like the start of an inappropriate joke. You know what I'm saying? A white hunter, a black hunter, and a Puerto Rican hunter walk into the woods.
Yeah.
Sounds like the start of a joke. But
Yeah.
these guys have told me about their experiences and how they encounter some things and how they make it a point, depending upon where they're hunting, that they hunt together. They even, depending on what they're hunting, they utilize radios in order to keep in contact with each other, just for their own safety around other hunters. And it
Hmm.
sounds weird, you know what I'm saying? But
Hmm.
it's a reality, at least out here. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? While many people may not believe it to be a thing, it is here, at least in
Mm.
New York State.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so I had appreciated that.
Yeah.
I guess, what is your take on, because I have my own ideas, but what do you think needs to be done? Is it a thing about representation in the media? Is it more about, just hunters opening up to, mentoring, outside of their own, towns, states, and stuff like that? What do you think is a good idea for, um, I guess, getting to that sort of inclusiveness that you were referencing in
Hmm.
your article?
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that's always tough in these kind of discussions is the whole idea of trying to what I call doing social engineering. You're actually
Hmm.
trying to steer things a certain way, and you think how hard it is to move a society in any kind of direction. Societies
Yeah.
are so huge. There's so many factors that come into this. Now, how do you actually get that harnessed and do something with it? And that's where I really give the Meateater guys a lot of credit, where they were willing to take this idea I had for a story, for an article, and for one thing, print it. This is not an article that a lot of magazines would tackle. It's just
Mm.
racial stuff gets people. They read things into it. They read things into it that aren't there, and I think that's one thing that disappointed me with some of the comments you saw like on Instagram and Facebook, where people would make all sorts of assumptions based on the headline, whatever it might be, and then blame the
Hmm.
headline for their problems. And I thought, you know, I understand that, because people tend to just read the headlines and people don't read bylines. They make assumptions before they read the whole thing. But I think when it comes to this particular topic, it it demands a little more attention. This is important.
Agreed.
And so, but to get back to your question, the one thing I think is important is to realize that hunting is a unique thing, is that we're kind of, even on the best of terms, when you're hunting with your brothers, you're hunting with your sister, a few sisters here and there. these kind of things, we tend to be competitive. We tend not to like to share our best hunting spots. Fishermen and hunters tend to be secretive. And so
Okay.
you have that working against it too, you know. So you have all these, to me, fascinating nuances of hunting that work against us when it tries to be when we try to be inclusive. Because you think,
Mm-hmm.
for God's sake, we're only inclusive with our closest friends sometimes. And now you're asking us to go out and invite people in that we've never met before. And so you see this tension starts being created. So I don't find that necessarily bad. I just find it interesting that,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I want this to work, but how can we make it work where it's fun? So you have guys like, I mentioned Doug Durin earlier, one of Steve's friends here in Wisconsin. Doug opens his farm to basically anyone who wants to hunt there. You know, you can't just show up whenever you want, but if you talk to Doug and work with him, there are people out there that will open the land that maybe, like, it might not be during the buck part of the hunt, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
for that, you know, late in December where we go after antlerless deer. You know, Doug will host hunts and invite people on. So there are those kind of opportunities, but the mentoring is a big one where, because this can't be a one and done deal if you want to get somebody into hunting. I mean, because the example I use a lot, Cliff, is I have 3 daughters. I tried introducing all 3 of them to hunting, you know, pretty aggressively, where I took them along a lot. And I did all the things that people recommend, get them involved in like goose hunting where there's constant action, where you can
Mm-hmm.
sit and talk to them and show them and call and do all the interactive stuff that's fun with hunting. And
Mm-hmm.
they're not just sitting in a deer blind, you know, freezing their butt off and being bored. You know, so I
Right.
tried all these things, and yet that even despite my best efforts to get them all interested in it, really only one daughter took it up. And then she was really good about going with me all the time. But now she's, you know, 34 years old. She now has 2 kids, one more on the way. She has her own career. She has a husband with a career, and she now lives in a more urban setting. She's out
Mm-hmm.
in California. And I
Wow.
realized that despite your best intentions, despite their interests,
Mm-hmm.
you know, life gets in the way of a lot of our recreations. And
Yes.
so you know, this won't be an easy thing that happens in my lifetime. And I'm sure, based on what we're seeing, we're going to see a downward trend continue for a while in hunting. But my hope is, by people like yourself being out there, and Steve and his network of guys and women, that this becomes something where people look at it as good, cool um, recreation, where it's not only recreation that people do to stay fit. Like, I watched your thing this morning doing your push-up thing, but it really helps a lot in hunting if you are fit and can do these hunts and get out and do things. So I look at it as something that really fits in many good ways with current trends to try to do healthy things that are self-sustaining, that we get our own food for ourselves, and make it worthwhile for folks.
Agreed. Agreed. It's funny because you mentioned about like life happens, and I feel like there's so many other factors. Like for me, like I grew up believing that hunting was a sport of of affluence. Like you had to have money. It was
Sure,
something that rich white people did. You know what I'm
sure,
saying? Like when I thought of hunting, I thought of safaris in Africa.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Things like that. It was along the lines of things that like uh skiing, skateboarding, BMX racing, stuff like that. It was not something that a person of color did. But I
right.
grew up in a time with a diverse group of friends, like where we felt we were kind of breaking those barriers and stuff like that. While I don't feel like I'm breaking any barriers necessarily with hunting or anything like that, I just feel like I guess there needs to be more of a voice for those, not just people of color, but all people in urban areas, about hunting and knowing what's available to them. So, putting that information out there, like knowing about what the seasons are, in a particular city or state, knowing what the laws are. So like I didn't know up until earlier this year that I could actually shoot my bow in a driveway. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
There
Yeah,
are laws regarding it in New York City.
right.
Um, I didn't even know what those laws were in relation to firearms as well, even though I don't shoot any firearms. But it's I guess it's just a matter of sharing that information. And it's funny you brought up. I'm sorry for backtracking. You
Oh,
talked about the secrecy. Sometimes amongst hunters because they don't want to share certain piece of information. I'll tell you a personal story. When I went to go take my bow hunters ed class, the instructors, the land that we were taking the class on was public land, and it was in an area that I believed that there was additional public land around that was open for hunting, because that area is throughout the entire deer season is bow hunting only. So I was like, wow, I hit the jackpot. So when I started asking questions about that, they're like, no, there's no public land around here that you can hunt. And I
huh.
was like, really? And I was like, you guys hunt around here? Yeah, we only hunt on private land. There's no public land around here for you to hunt. And I was
Yeah.
just like, wow, all right. So I was disappointed, and I realized I had to change up what my plans were and kind of reach out to other hunters in New York that might be willing to let me tag along with whatever they do, wherever
Yeah.
they go. But come to find out, speaking to another hunter who lived in the same area, he was like, oh, hell no, there's public land out here for you to hunt. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow. And I was like, and that's when I get to, like, these are guys who hunt in the area and just don't want any other
Oh,
competition.
exactly. Exactly.
So I never I had never thought that that was necessarily a real thing until experiencing that.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I guess my other question is, I'm sorry, I had
That's fine.
taken so many notes. Um, was Is there a way to, because I had brought up the media, um, is there a way to kind of challenge in this world now of social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and stuff like that, to challenge or get more representation out there? Challenge maybe big companies, big bow companies, whatever it is. Challenge them to get a little bit more representation out there. Like,
Hmm.
do you have any, like, for me per se? Like, I'm out here right now. I'm using the only platform I have because I don't have any podcasts. Equipment. I don't have cameras. This is, I mean, it's very weird to refer to an iPhone as low tech, but it's literally my iPhone, myself in my bedroom, saying,
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
guest. So,
Yeah.
um, what ways are there for those in urban areas to try to, I guess, without a for lack of a better word, ask for more representation
Hmm.
in the media, you know, so that way it's a little bit more appealing to those living in places like New York City, Chicago,
Yeah.
Boston.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where my own shortcomings come into play a little bit. Where I've never been really good about understanding the public relations side of things. I've been more
Yeah.
of a reporter and kind of an analyst type person. That I write opinion columns too. But the one thing that I like about social media, and I hope this gets going more, is when I see folks sharing pictures of fish and game they get. Now it's controversial. Now some folks don't like of showing pictures of us with a deer or
Mm,
posing with an elk or a bear, whatever it might be. That this is, but I think those different groups of guys that had no problem with it, I always hope that they kind of start finding each other. Like this Rick Dillard, who I quoted in my article, the guy from Mississippi. He was saying in the article that I thought was an interesting commentary, was that until he started looking at stuff on Facebook and comparing pictures from friends they knew, he'd said things like, I never knew so and so hunted before until I got on Facebook. And so I'm kind of hoping that in some ways that just the social media itself will start showing people that this isn't just a white guy's sport. The numbers definitely show it is. But I start hoping that as people start seeing you hunting, and that it'll start being this little tiny ripples of hope going out and creating waves, and
yeah.
eventually you'll build something here. Because I don't think this is going to happen overnight. I just don't think unless you have some, I think it helps like when I was a kid. This goes back, not a kid, but a younger man, probably about a little bit younger than you. I remember seeing a thing on NFL Today. I think it was I think it was in CBS. Had the NFL games on Sunday. They did
Mm,
a pregame show one time showing Walter Payton and 2 or 3 of his black teammates out pheasant hunting. And I thought, well, cool. Now, if that was something that more people saw these athletes doing, these are high-profile guys, and they only get 1 day off a week to go do something. Well, on their off day, these guys are going pheasant hunting. And I thought, well, looking back, and I realized, well, that makes sense, because I think Walter Payton, if I'm not mistaken, grew up in Mississippi or some southern state where he grew up in a hunting culture. And recently Steve had Bo Jackson on his podcast.
Yes.
And I realized there are high-profile black guys out there who like to hunt. And I think as more people see it as a cool activity, not something that's just ego-driven or a sport or an activity for the well-to-do, where they can relate to it. But I think that's what it comes down to, is you have to relate to it. I grew up in a family of 6. I was one of 4 boys, and then I have 2 sisters. I was the only one who had the itch to go hunting.
Really?
And yeah, my dad taught us all how to hunt and fish, but he wasn't really. He liked to golf more than he did hunt and fish. I think hunting and fishing was just too slow for him for the most part, and too unpredictable. Golf is something kind of going into what you're gonna do each time you go out there. Where hunting, you step out of that car, step out of your truck, and I think that's what's fun about it. You don't know what's going to happen. It's just going to be a whole different kind of adventure for you. So I don't know. I wish I had, Cliff, some great formula. Here's what we should be doing. But I guess if there's one thing I wanted to bring up, was one thing that did disappoint me in some of the comments was people who got defensive about it. That they, if these black people want to hunt, what's stopping them? And I think, well, we're pushing so. I think it was John Annoni made this point in my article. That, we want to pat ourselves in the back for taking our wives hunting or taking our kids hunting. Well, that's easy. We should be doing that anyway.
Agreed.
And those folks. The thing I'll say though, I can take my daughters hunting. I can take my wife hunting, but I'm not sure in the big picture, in the long run, how big of a market that's really going to be for the hunting industry. I really think we're going to get back to this thing where I still think hunting will always have a strong male component, that's stronger than the female component, because I see it firsthand in my family. So I think the chances of getting you hooked on hunting and some of your friends hooked on hunting, I think are pretty damn good. Where you guys can become a market force, where I'm not sure my daughters and their friends, I'm not sure how strong that force would be. I think we need all these folks, not just this group or that group or whatever we might be targeting. So I guess that's where I look at this when I go back to that question, the original question, is hunting too white? I think, well, you can make the argument about a lot of things. Is it too male? Yes, it is too male. We don't, should be more females in it. And if you get the black community hunting more, should we say then, well, we got some of these guys now, but could we still have more brown? I think, yeah, we could. We should be working for these angles and making it accessible to folks. And I think it's a legitimate question that you're asking. Why aren't we, like Rick Dillard made this question, why aren't we seeing more black guys show up in the catalogs, the sporting catalogs, the sporting magazines? I think I don't know how to answer that, because I think it's a fair point, but you go back in the marketing side of things, though, it's always this catch-22. Well, what came first? Do you have to have the audience first, or you have to build the audience first?
Kind of like a supply and demand. The demand has to be there before. I totally agree, because if you think about it, like years ago, when let's say women were predominantly played the role of homemaker, and if you watch on TV, just about every ad was geared towards the homemaker.
Right.
I mean, now these days, of course, it's more family oriented than it is just female oriented. But I totally agree in terms of that. It could be the demand needs to be there, or it could be challenge these big companies to start marketing, but I believe these companies would need the assurance that one of those, if you build it, they will come.
Right.
type of mentality. You'd have to start with one company, and they'd have to see that kind of result.
Yeah.
So I totally understand.
Yeah, it always comes back to these I think core principles. This isn't about charity. This is about making this work, making this productive. And so
Hmm.
I just really hope that we get enough people involved in this where it just isn't. We don't even think about it. I wish we weren't even talking about in terms of black and white. I wish it was just
Hmm.
Americans hunting together and feeling comfortable with each other. And this is our country, and it's not. It kind of irritates me sometimes when I have to end up in these discussions of black and white. I think, oh, God, we're all Americans. We should all be doing something that is equal. We all have equal access to it.
You know what? To quote Mark Kenyon is the last
Mark
name. The
Kenyon,
whole
yeah,
yeah. On
yeah,
a podcast not too long ago, his Wired to Hunt podcast, he had Lan Tawny
Lantani,
on.
sure, yeah,
Yeah, and one of the best quotes that I've heard that really hit home was I have to paraphrase, but it went along the lines of that. Lan Tawny said that he wanted the hunting community to reflect the diversity of our country, of
I,
America,
I, yep,
and that
I'm with
really
him.
hit home.
I'm with him. That's really, if we had a perfect solution to it, that's what it'd be. Where we all, like I pointed out in the article that we had these percentages of how our country breaks down. In the current time we're at like what I think 55 to 60. I think we're about 60% white right now. It won't be too much longer. 20 years from now, we'll be about I think at 49%. So
Hmm.
these demographics are changing. But you wish we were seeing that kind of representation in hunting, where
Hmm.
if the black population right now makes up 13% of America, you wish they're making up 13% of the American hunter, and had that
Hmm.
just parallel all the way along. It should
Hmm.
be something that's open to all of us. But for some, but Cliff, what's cool about this whole topic, I think though,
Hmm.
I look at this in a bigger picture and I think, well, by the same token, I'm a runner. Now, I've
Hmm.
run a number of marathons in the last 10 years, and there's an article in Runner's World magazine about 5 years ago is, why don't blacks run marathons?
I
I think,
do.
well, yeah, good for you. Yeah, but because there's a group down in Madison, Wisconsin, I think it was in Madison or Milwaukee, there's a group of black people who made it a point of getting together and showing the white people basically that, yeah, blacks run marathons too.
Yep.
So,
I've run two New York City marathons.
excellent.
I helped create a run crew out here in Queens as well. Shout out to Run Hustle Run.
Good, good
Um,
deal. Good for
but
you.
one of the awesome things that I liked, and I'm gonna kind of wrap this up a little bit.
Yep.
We'll
Yep.
get to the tail end of this because, like I said,
Okay.
Instagram only gives us an hour.
Yep.
Um, it's all about perspective. Because one of the things, it's funny you brought up running. I had really liked when you were a guest on the Bryant Land Country podcast. You made the analogy of you running, um, and then you compared it to your daughter running. How you guys both prepare differently.
Yeah.
That you as a man, you prepare. What was it exactly you said? What did you,
Yeah.
according to
Yeah.
your route, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, when I walk out the door in the morning, and usually the night before, I'll have an idea in my mind, where should I run tomorrow morning? And
Mm,
I tell you, Cliff, I don't even think in terms of personal safety, except for I want to run someplace where there's not much traffic. It's the only thing that really enters my mind. Whereas
same here.
my daughter, though, who's 31 years old and attractive and small, she steps out her door and she puts a lot of damn thought into where she can run, where she's never out of sight of neighborhood homes. So there's always people around, and so she won't be isolated someplace where she'd be in danger, where she would feel
Hmm.
in danger. And I think, damn it, that's where I started to hit home for me is, when people say that that everything's just hunky dory. I think, well, everything's so fine in your world. Have you ever looked at that from your daughter's perspective? It's not all
Hmm.
fine in her world. She's scared of some things out there, and she's
Hmm.
probably has a good reason to be scared. And I think that's where I said to Adam, for me to sit there and act like I have all the answers. I've never been in a black man's shoes. I
Hmm.
can't know what his world is like. And when people say that the black community, that they should be happy, I think, well, if there's everything so perfect in their world, would you switch places with them? I think it's a fair question to ask people when they get all crappy about this, because I don't think I'm in a position to know what your world is like, because being around my daughters who I raised, it hit me one day that I really didn't know what their world is like. Running made me aware of it. At least made me realize their world is different from mine. Don't assume you know it all. So I get all worked up about that. But for me, it was kind of a humbling moment when I realized I'd raised 3 daughters and yet really didn't know that aspect of their life, that they have to think about those kind of things when they walk out the door, where I never think about that kind of stuff.
Wow. Well, I guess my last thought on it is as I said, it's about perspective. So while I know the article was entitled, "Is hunting too white?" It really is more than just about color. It's what I challenge people to. If you guys, whoever's watching, if you haven't read the article, again, the author is the gentleman below me, Patrick Durkin. It's called "Is Hunting Too White?" Read the article, because while people really don't want to address the fact that color does play into it, it's mainly because it's funny, because another Instagrammer said, "Oh, it's not about color, it's about accessibility, it's about locale." You're 100% correct. But what race occupies the majority of that urban area? It's predominantly Black and Hispanic people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So therefore, that's who you want to reach out to. So
Right.
I'm hoping that if anyone is watching this and takes the time to listen and go ahead and read your article, take that away from it to just really think about it. Try to walk a mile, in someone else's shoes, someone totally different from you, who doesn't look like you, who isn't from where you're from.
Yeah.
And you know what? To close this out, you, the author, what do you hope that, if someone hasn't read the article yet, which I highly doubt, what would you want them to take away from it?
I think the biggest thing there is to look at this as an issue that won't be solved tomorrow or the next day, but something that every day we should be thinking about, and something that, if you have someone in your life that is looking for an opportunity to go hunting, invite them along and bring them into your circle, because it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen through just programs. I mean, I think there's some programs that have a better chance than other ones, but I think it's going to come back to the same old thing we've talked about. The way hunting was built in my lifetime when I was a youngster was basically through the family, where dad taught you how to hunt, got you kind of familiar with things, and some other adults took you through hunter education, taught you the classes, but then you kind of went off on your own. And when I was a kid, it was much easier to go hunting. I used to ride my bicycle through neighborhoods with a shotgun strapped to the handle, the crossbar, and no one thought twice about it. Yeah, no one thought twice about it. You think, well, you don't do that kind of thing in today's world.
No,
so
that's nowhere. Not even in the rural area, rural areas, I would say.
Yeah, you don't see little boys much anymore. You see them doing fishing with their fishing rods on their bicycles, but you don't see many youngsters doing with hunting with firearms. And so when I come up against those kind of realities, I think we have to start looking at different ways to get guys out there hunting, and it's going to be much more on adults now than it was when I was a kid. Little boys and girls today have a much harder time getting themselves out in the woods than it was when I was a kid growing up. So that's I think it's going to be much more on the adults now than it was a generation ago. And then we start involving more layers like that, the more complicated it gets. And that's why this won't be easy. And I guess that's one thing I should just always keep to remind people. If you're looking for a magic bullet, I don't think there is one. I think it's going to just kind of come down to that love of things. And I'll keep saying this. It's guys like you, it's guys like Ranella, these are other folks, been on Brian, all these folks, they're out there making a difference, making hunting cool. I think that's where it is, where guys take pride in it, girls take pride in it. They enjoy the whole activity together.
All right. Thank you. Well, listen, I don't know how to get tickets or how I would get out there, but you mentioned the ATA show. I would
Yeah,
love to head out there, just to put some urban representation,
yeah, yeah.
out there,
Well,
in the
well,
world.
you being a media guy, you could, I'm sure you can, make a case for yourself to get in there and cover it. So it's, if you ever
Oh,
need any help on
definitely.
that, if you ever need any help on that front, let me know because, that's we need that kind of, if you're out there to cover the show and what's new and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
they want you there.
Oh, all right.
You
Good to
know,
know.
yeah,
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
you bet.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Patrick Durkin. Pat, thank you so much for coming out and joining me tonight on Instagram. I really appreciate it. Thank you for elaborating on your article. Real quick, can you let everyone know, besides Meateater, is there
Hmm.
anywhere
Yeah,
else that we could find your
yeah,
content?
yeah. I post either the article itself or all my links. I'm at patrickdurkinoutdoors.com. It's all one
Okay,
word, patrickdurkinoutdoors.com.
okay,
And if you go on there, you'll find my newspaper columns, you'll find my magazine articles, links to the podcast, links to
okay.
Meateater articles, and Meateater does a good job of keeping. If you click on my name there, you can go to a little spot where all my stuff is listed. So you can bore yourself silly reading my articles there. So
Well, I also just read, I believe the most recent one was talking about, I guess the kind of the evolution of hunter safety. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
was that was an interesting article as well. I highly recommend everyone go ahead and check that one out as well.
great. Thanks,
All right.
Cliff.
No problem. Thank you again, Pat.
I
All
hope
right.
you'll have me on again.
Oh no, definitely, definitely, and
Okay,
I will be picking your brain, over the next couple of months leading up to my first hunting season.
happy to help.
Thank you, thank you. You have a great night, Pat.
Thanks, Cliff. Good talking to you.
Same here.
You bet.